Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we learned about setting up our Google sign-in authentication into our application. However, there's one thing I want to make very clear. If you look inside of your authentication tab, here you'll see your user that you signed in with. The one thing though is that this user list that you'll get whenever you do sign in with these different authentication services, whether it be Google sign-in or any of these other sign-in methods that are available that you can add. We earlier added in Google, but you can do Facebook sign-in, GitHub sign-in, Twitter sign-in, email password sign-in. All of these different authentication provider services, they all add to your user list inside of the authentication tab. But these are not necessarily users that are accessible within your Firestore database. So this is an important thing I want to make clear. The authentication service that you have here is a separate service from the Firestore database. Firestore is the actual database that we're going to be leveraging. And inside of Firebase, this is pretty much like a schema-less database. So schema-less just really means that it's pretty much a JSON object. You can store whatever fields with whatever values that you want. Of course, generally, you want this to be more consistent so that your data is consistent across users, meaning that if you get user 1 versus user 1000, you can trust that the shape of the data is the same, meaning that they have the same fields. Maybe they have the same first name field and the last name field with whatever the value of those users will be, but you want that consistency. Here, look inside and you'll notice that even though we've authenticated our user, we actually don't have any users inside of our Firestore. So what we're going to do now is we are going to make sure that whenever a user authenticates, we also create a record of them inside of Firestore. So now we're going to start actually storing that user's information inside of our database. So we're going to start working with Firestore database. Now, before we start working with this, there's a couple things we need to understand about Firestore. It's got kind of an interesting structure, and it takes a little bit of time to get used to the way to work with it, but we're going to walk through that in this video. So first, I got to show you a slideshow. So let's talk about Firebase's data model. Inside, Firestore is really comprising data of three things. There is the collection, there is the document, and then there's the data. So this visual is very good because it's kind of like looking about a folder. Inside of a folder, you might have multiple documents. On each document, the data related to that document is what's written on that document. So you can imagine that if we had a collection of users, we would make a separate folder with users on it so that we know that inside of that folder, it's all of our data related to every instance of user that is inside of our database. Each separate document represents an individual piece of data, so an independent user. Now, the actual information related to that user is going to be the data. So let's walk through this. Let's talk about the document model first. The document model is really the smallest unit inside of Firestore. So here, imagine we had a shoe because we are Crown Clothing, meaning that we sell clothing. So imagine that we had some unique ID for this specific shoe document, and it's Nike Air Max. It's just a unique string. This Nike Air Max inside will have data that tells you what the information regarding the shoe will be. So the name will be Air Max as a string, the brand is Nike, and then the image URL, imagine that points to some URL of the actual image. This is a data shape. This is a JSON object that kind of holds the information that is relevant to shoes. Now, if you look inside of this model, maybe sometimes, so far, some of these fields may be nested. So cost might actually be another JSON object. So far, what we saw with name, brand, and image URL, it's a single level, meaning that it just points to one value, in this case being strings. Whereas cost here is perhaps a JSON object that has two fields on it, a price, which might be a number, and then the currency that this price is in, so USD, which is a string. So this is something interesting that you want to know about documents is that they're pretty much JSON objects. But this is really just the majority of how our individual pieces of data is going to get stored. So if you were to look at the model, Nike Air Max here, that unique string with no spaces, that would be the name of this document or the ID of this document. Whereas down here, all of this information inside, well, that's the data. So I'm matching the gray to the data and then the blue to the document. So that's one thing that you want to know about. When you want to access the information related to a document, remember that what you're trying to get is the data for that document. Now let's talk about collections. So we know we're talking about shoes. So here, imagine that we had a shoes collection. Inside of that shoes collection, we might have our Nike Air Max example, which is just a document of a shoe living inside our shoes collection. But then we might also have Adidas NMD, which is another document. That's for another specific shoe. And you'll notice that the shape again looks very similar. They all have name, brand, image, URL, and cost, which is an object that points to price and currency. So you'll see here that the structure is the same, but the values are different. And that's because, again, shoes is the collection. Nike Air Max and Adidas NMD, those are unique strings that represent the ID of these individual separate documents. And then the values inside is the data respective for those documents. So any data that we're going to store in Firebase is going to generally fit inside this model of collections, documents, and then their respective data. So now that we have a rough high-level idea of these, let's actually start implementing and working with Firestore, our database, with these in mind. So I'll see you in the next video where we'll start doing that.